All right, welcome back to Vital Voices. I'm genuinely excited about today's episode because our guest isn't just a friend, he's someone whose journey I've had the privilege of watching unfold over the years, Rob Zudic. And let me tell you, this guy's he has a wealth of information. We've known each other since ninth grade, and Rob's always been the kind of person who's excels at everything he does, and his career is a testament to that. On the one hand, Rob's built an impressive real estate portfolio, navigating the complexities of the market. On the other hand, he's also spent years innovating in manufacturing and product development, solving tough problems and leading teams in some of the most challenging industries. So today we're going to dive into both worlds, real estate and hardware product development, or manufacturing and product development. We'll explore the lessons, challenges, and opportunities in each. And trust me on this, we'll uncover how these seemingly different paths are more connected than you might think. And of course, knowing Rob, we might even touch on his love for Chelsea and his recent engagement. So big congrats on that. So, Rob, I'm glad you're here. And for the listeners who don't know you as well as I do, can you give us a quick backstory? Like, how did you go from a kid who loves engineering to someone leading, manufacturing development and building a real estate portfolio on the side?
Yeah, for sure. Well, happy to be here, number one. That's quite the introduction. So yeah, my journey to starting as an engineer, that's a good question. So it kind of happened naturally, but probably the beginning of it was as a little kid, I was kind of always enamored with any kind of machinery, right? So trucks, airplanes. I'd go to air shows with my dad and was, just kind of fascinated with, the noise and the sound and, just watching these kind of really complicated machines do like amazing things. So that was kind of just an initial interest, and then academically throughout high school, kind of what made everything click was I took a physics course, which you took the same class, right, with Kennedy at Nequa. So basically, it was a honors physics class, and I'm like, oh, so this is actually all the math and whatnot behind like rockets and projectiles and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of made that initial that kind of made the connection between things that I casually observed in the world to actual like career pursuits. So pursued mechanical engineering and then kind of never looked back. And then kind of shifting into throughout the kind of engineering whatever academic journey. I was part of the Society of Automotive Engineers, just college club, and by pure happenstance, just by being a part of the group, someone at a nearby local company developing commercial trucks and diesel engines reached out looking for resumes for internships. So put mine in the hat, or put my hat in the ring. Got a random call between a couple of finals, asking if I could do a phone interview, and I'm like, well, I got a final in an hour, so it's not the best time. They're like, oh, it'll only take 5 minutes. So they asked me about 5 minutes worth of questions about diesel engines. I thought I did a pretty awful job because I was put on the spot, and then they called me back a day later and were like, hey, we'd like to offer you an internship. So that was kind of the beginning. I kind of cut my teeth in like engine development world. So a lot of complex engineering problems, but your stereotypical mechanical engineer, right? That would be kind of the stuff I was working on. So did that stint for about what 7.5 years, I think. Ended up, due to some restructuring within that company, decided to, pursue opportunities elsewhere, and then landed my current role, which is different industry, more on like commercial plumbing products. It's funny because the industries are so different, and you think, there's a difference in complexity of the products, but the kind of the core tenets and processes that you'd see in product development are consistent. So it was a lot smoother of a transition than you'd think. So it's not like you're reinventing the wheel. You're kind of applying the same tools, processes, methodologies, just to a different type of product. So that's kind of the engineering arc. Obviously, in terms of responsibilities, move from individual contributor to manager, which again comes with its own set of challenges, right? Kind of learning how to be more of a leader and a coach and a mentor as opposed to a doer, which is a shift unto itself. And yeah, been in that role now for probably about 2 to 3 years. With respect to real estate, I wouldn't quite call it an impressive portfolio, but it's a small and growing portfolio. Um, the real estate is kind of totally unrelated, but if I could trace back the origins as why, um, believe it or not, I never had like a real huge desire to climb the corporate ladder. So I always thought that it would be a nice side income. We had a lot of family friends who kind of came from an immigrant background. They, worked blue collar jobs and just, through some old fashioned saving and practical handyman knowledge, acquired, one property here, another property there, and next thing you know, you see these guys rolling up in like S-class Benzes. So it's like, hey, this must be something to this. So I always kind of had a desire to buy rentals, and then as a kid, probably without even knowing it, but I'm sure my dad kind of imprinted a lot of that. He built three of the houses that we lived in as when I was a kid, my mom and I. So um, and we would always we moved not a lot, but a decent amount. My parents weren't really averse to moving, so we were the types that would kind of for fun go to open houses on the weekends and just check out if there was new construction, like, oh, what do these look like? And so I think I kind of naturally developed a little knack for real estate. And then, you know, you couple that with the the beauty for a lot of people diving into real estate, if you come from a technical background like engineering, the math and the analysis of a deal, it's not really rocket science, right? It's pretty simple stuff relative to what you'd be used to coming out of a technical field. So, um, applying that kind of logical analysis to it, you know, you can call it bringing the engineer mind. It kind of was a nice fit. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am today, at least professionally and from the investing standpoint.
Okay. So then, yeah. So let's touch on the managing side. So obviously, you had, I'm sure, like everyone, you had your good managers and bad managers, early on in your career. I would say, what were your learnings from that? And I think, what have you taken into, being a manager now that you feel like really is going to allow your team to succeed?
Great question. I like this question. So I would say most managers, maybe you can call it kind of three buckets, but the good, if you look at it on a spectrum, there's those that are more technical and those that are more so there's technical skills, right? There's technical elements of the job, and then there's call it like the managerial skill sets. So, someone can be an outstanding technical engineer and maybe not always the best at some of the managerial things. When I say managerial, I'm generally talking about like setting expectations, um, uh, providing clear framework of deliverables, things like that. And then on the other side, um, you know, I've had managers that are maybe not even necessarily like the sharpest technically, not that they were deficient in any way, but were really outstanding at the managerial aspects, right? Knowing how to set up a team with the right structure, having the right, not only the right reporting structure, but the right accountability, and then really setting clear objectives. So I tried to kind of uh, cherry pick the best of both. I always used to think that the manager, I was like, how do people manage this whole team? How do they know? Like, I don't know anything about this particular subset of engineering or even like a specific component or system. And I'm like, wow, if this guy manages the whole thing, he's got to be an expert in all of them, right? And obviously, that's not the case at all. I think a lot of engineers are very conditioned to, say, I need to know every little detail, right? And I need to be an expert at every little thing. But what you quickly learn is as you start managing a bigger team, it's just not feasible nor practical, right? So one of the big adjustments or tweaks I had to make is being comfortable with not being the expert in every little, call it subfield or subsystem, but to know how to effectively leverage your team, right? So, and those are the things that, I gained from those managers that really excelled at kind of the managerial aspects of being a manager. Sorry, a lot of use of the word manager there, but so yeah, I think a healthy balance of both is needed. But the best, I think, the most important thing is the understanding that you have to be able to empower and leverage your team to fill your own deficiencies, right? And build. It's like this the sports analogy, right? You need different players in different positions, right? You can't have 10, 11 of the same type of player on the field. So, yeah, that's kind of, I don't know, does that answer your question? I maybe veered off
Yeah.
on a tangent, but
Yeah, I mean, I think, and kind of what it seems like you're kind of alluding to an extent too, and this has always stuck with me. Someone once told me that like a manager's job, really, an effective manager is more to open doors, than to be the person that really, tells their team what they can and can't do. It's like, is that something that, kind of you agree with or aligns with what you're saying?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially when you're in a field where you're managing professionals, right? I mean, it's one thing that, I mean, if you're if you're more at, say, okay, I've got a team of you know, 5 16-year olds that are, working at the fryer at McDonald's, right? Then maybe, it is a lot more like, those day to day, like you have to show up on time, you have to do this, you can't do that, right? But I think as you get more into that kind of professional setting, those things are implied largely. And, you're exactly right, right? The manager's job is to, um, clear roadblocks. And I think one of my previous managers, one of his biggest, what's the word? One of the things he was really big on that very much made an impact on me is he said, my job is to provide you guys with clarity, right? Like everyone should know exactly what they need to do and by when. And because he's like, if you don't have clarity and direction on, what the expectations are and what the deliverables are, then you've guaranteed you won't be successful right off the bat, right? And so I think that's a lot of the focus needs to be spent on, and I think that's what you mean to say is, you're opening doors to them, right? Allow them to uh, you know exercise their expertise, right? Allow them to do the actual engineering work and remove all of the ambiguity because you get into a corporate setting, anyone who's worked in the corporate world, right? There's so many different stakeholders that need to be aligned, right? So it may seem like, well, that's really simple, right? If you were working in a group of like 3 4 people on your own, right, in a vacuum, it wouldn't be an issue, right? But you've got different functions which who all have different priorities, right? And you know, there's a whole mechanism behind getting those people aligned and pulling in the same direction, and it always comes with some kind of compromise, right? No one gets all of what they want, so if there's a lack of clarity and they're getting, one priority from person A and the other priority from person B, and they don't know which way to go and how to focus their time, then they're just, they're not going to be successful at the end of the day, no matter how good they are at the technical aspects of the job. So, Yeah, I agree. That's kind of my long way of saying that I agree with what your comments are, right? You have to be removing roadblocks, providing clear direction, and ultimately let them do the execution.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of on a somewhat joking but not really joking note, obviously you're a Chelsea fan, so like, how does being a fan of a team like that? I mean, I'm assuming it builds character, considering they suck every season. But like, how does that shape your perspective on resilience and leadership?
Notwithstanding a rough patch through the festive season, I think we've been having a pretty good year. It was with respect to adversity. I'm going to dodge the
The
Chelsea
resilience.
jab there. Um, I mean, I think soft skills, that's another thing, maybe, people coming from a technical background. I'll count myself as this as well. Like I would take, we took in my one of my previous roles, just leadership development courses, through an MBA program. And it was sponsored by the company, so it wasn't like a full-time MBA, but business school type classes. So obviously you can relate as someone who's done the full coursework. But as an engineer, the first go around when they go through the whole there's a lot of soft skill focus. I mean, the first reaction is like, well, this is BS. We don't need this shit, right? But then you realize truly how important it is, right? Because there are so many different stakeholders with different priorities, right? And if you are able, like being a strong negotiator and uh, being able to persuade people of your positions is like so powerful. I joke a lot of times with my team is part of the job is lawyer, right? Engineering is one part, but sometimes, like some days, you have to be a lawyer. You have to be able to take, and it could be about a design decision, right? you know, uh, People aren't always going to take you at face value. Like, there's no design that's perfect, right? There's always some kind of trade-off involved. So, if you're making the case for like, trade-off A versus trade-off B, and there's perhaps strong implications with going one way versus the other, being able to persuade your audience, to take your direction is like, it's huge, right?
Yeah.
And that extends beyond, the more you go into leadership, if a manager is ineffective at advocating for their team, it can drive a lot of disengagement at the working level because they don't feel like above them there's any sort of buffer from all of the inevitable, noise and chaos that comes from, corporate life, right? And that's normal, and that's just a function of people having different priorities, and it's par for the course, right? But it's finding the optimal solution amongst many. So there's an analogy. Uh, so there's like a Speaking of trade-offs, there's a good example of this, maybe concrete, that's more concrete for people to wrap their head around. But um, I took a systems engineering certification course through MIT, and they talked about how to uh, assess trade-offs within product development, right, as it pertains to product design. And they talked about an airliner, right? So most everyone's been on an airliner. So what would an airliner look like if it was optimized by if it was made optimal for various functionalities, right? So if it was made optimal for aerodynamics, it would be like pencil thin and very long. It had little drag, but you couldn't fit any passengers, right? If the marketing team designed it or the finance team, you would have like, it would be ginormous and have like 8,000 seats and it couldn't take off, right? If the maintenance people designed it, it would have like 500 panels to access all the equipment on the outside and it would have way too much drag, right? So, what it was intended to illustrate is that every design is some sort of like compromise. And when you're negotiating these compromises, it's exactly that, right? It's a negotiation. So it's really critical sometimes to have the soft skills to be able to persuade what's often non-technical audience, right? Persuade them with technical information without getting too in depth. So, anyways, that's my kind of it's my soapbox on the importance of soft skills and that kind of thing.
No, I mean that makes sense. Like with respect to, I'm calling it hardware, but effectively development of any physical product as opposed to a
Yep.
software product. It's notorious for being challenging, potentially, well, significantly slower usually than software development, oftentimes more expensive and more unforgiving. So with that and some of the stuff that you've already alluded to or touched on, what's been the toughest challenge you've faced in this space because of that? And just to know, like one of the things I'm alluding to is it's like oftentimes like the Facebook mantra. Their mantra is like break things and go. It's like effectively they're just like move as fast as you can, even if you break the code, and then we'll fix it as we need to. But it's like you can't really take that mentality. I would say as much with physical products because if you need to actually, I mean, depending on how expensive the physical product is, if you actually need to create a prototype, it's like you can't just create a
Right.
shit prototype and then try to fix it because like that just wouldn't be efficient.
Right. I mean, uh, on a basic level, the cost associated with it's much simpler to upload software, right? And you push an app or something, okay, there's a bug, and then you push new software, right? So in kind of the physical product space, there's all other types of call them investments, right, that need to be made to make a physical product, right? And the biggest one that sticks out is tooling investment, right? So if you need to make certain parts like a molded piece of plastic, right? The lead time to develop that tool is longer, and then there's a significant one-time cost. But on the back end, the benefit is a very cheap, like per unit price, right? And so, unfortunately, the issue with that is investing that money up front, you need the volume to recover that initial cost. So it's not really an effective way of like, you invest a lot of money in like a tool and, you release a product that breaks and then that tool is now either has to be modified or scrapped, right? So that comes at a lot of cost. Um, what's all the rage lately and is getting more and more viable and popular is additive manufacturing or AKA 3D printing. So 3D printing is, potentially a really effective, call it like bridge solution for lower-ish volumes, right? To assess designs or, what usually at the prototype level, but sometimes production with pretty short turnaround time. So that's something that's usually leveraged, in kind of concepting, prototyping phases of development. But that's the biggest challenge, right? When working with physical products is that piece. Um, and as the complexity of the product scales, so does that challenge, right? So to use a very rudimentary example, a really, really basic product, let's say it's like 4 or 5 components. Um, okay, not a big deal, right? Now, the polar opposite of that, or the other extreme, is like an airliner again, right? You're not going to do the cost associated with building a single airplane to find out that it breaks, right? Is you'd go out of business tomorrow, right? So they're completely different worlds in that extent. And, I think there's a lot of, um, you know, if we're going to talk about AI and, kind of computing power and models, um, that is what's starting to accelerate the development of very, very complex systems is the ability to model them, uh, you know, model them in virtual space as opposed to physical. So, um, was it the next generation like fighter? There's some military program for like the F-22 is a fifth gen fighter jet. There's a sixth gen that apparently is already flying, but it's obviously still classified. But uh, what's being discussed at Department of Defense, I've read some articles about it, but the whole kind of systems engineering methodology has allowed a much more rapid development of that uh, product or solution based on the fact that there's a better ability. There's more predictive models that can help develop and mature designs before having to go to physical prototype. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I mean, let's talk about that a little bit. So obviously, with respect, if especially if you're doing a comparison to software, it seems like there's obviously it's a slower process. There's can be testing inefficiencies. Like even the 3D printing, right, is when you're printing a product out, like what's the life cycle on a 3D printed product versus one that you've got machined through a tool?
Um, you mean like the volumes or
More the like how long
the
is it gonna
durability?
last? Yeah, the durability.
So, um, in general, and I'm, probably going to butcher this explanation, but in general, I think the limitation is the number of materials you can 3D print. So you could run into issues of, they tend, the material properties maybe tend to be different than that of like a molded part. So either because the actual composition of the resins are different, or maybe it has to do with how it's applied and layered versus molded and cured, right? So I think it's more of a material science question. Um, I think there are some. So that's one piece. Assuming that you can get, let's say it's a part that doesn't, it's not under much load. There's a there's kind of a volume breaking point to where 3D printing makes sense, and then beyond that, it just doesn't because the per unit cost of a molded part is just so much cheaper. Does that make sense? So, like, let's say, for example, if
Yeah.
you're under 10,000 parts, maybe it makes sense to just 3D print it. But if you're making a million parts, you might as well pay the whatever, $100,000 for the tool, but the part is like 30 cents, right? As opposed to $3.50.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I mean, okay, so let's take this and connect it to the AI that you mentioned. So it's like 10 years ago, if you were using products like ANSYS, I think like to do simulations for hard products that you actually have to create. I think a lot of it was like rule-based design, right? Like you enter the parameters based on that, and it's more of a slow iterative process. Whereas now with AI, as you mentioned, you can have a generative process where the AI can effectively create multiple parameters, right? Rules, weights, and then it can start simulating that to understand how certain product designs are going to fare in different environments. So it's like that obviously, like you mentioned, is going to speed up the process, reduce the cost on the process. But it's like where like do you see that is that where you see this going across the board? Like even for, I mean, effectively all industries, not just like, aeronautics or thing like rockets, things like that nature, but even like, home appliances, or do you see things going in a different direction?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think maybe what you're asking or what you were describing is like a design of experiments.
Yeah, I mean, like what I've read up on AI is more, and I'm not as well versed as you at this. It's just like it seems like the simulation capabilities of AI is getting robust enough or good enough that it itself can start like creating models and testing them across a variety of environments. So then you as the engineer will understand how the product fares, as opposed to you having to go in and individually change the inputs or the parameters to, I guess, simulate the
Mm,
environment.
okay. I mean, anytime you're changing, so let's say you have a design and you want to look at the sensitivity to certain features on some output variable, right? Um, I guess you could call that a design of experiment, right? So like I want to change this design parameter X through a range of different values and then see how it impacts the outcome, um, or the output variable. Uh, I mean, AI, like, so all those things, right? Like, manually setting up a design of experiments. It seems like that would be a place where, artificial intelligence could, you know, there's so many possibilities, right? As opposed to you having to understand how to set up a DOE, you just say, so, right now you've got like Six Sigma green belt, black belt, right? They can set up like a design of experiments, to assess a design, right? And you want to find kind of like the optimal combination of parameters uh, to optimize whatever performance metric you want, right? I mean, AI, you could basically just tell it, you could talk to it and say, hey, I have a design. I want you to, modify these parameters in such a way that um, I want to maximize this, right? And then I think the challenge a lot of times, like, could it develop it's the computation on the back end, right? So if it's a closed loop problem or an optimization problem, then you don't, it's writing the code that most people would probably struggle with, right? But
Right.
if AI can just say, okay, this is the problem statement, um, here is a model that will do that, and it's coded, and just, input your parameters here. I mean, yeah, that's like, it's almost, it's almost like the difference between, uh, hand calculations versus using like computer aided engineering, right? The the level of, like, think about, I mean, perfect example, right? Look at the automotive industry, right? What has the increase in computation power and in computer aided engineering allowed engineers to do, right? Um, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, what was the design margin or the safety factor on like a typical component? It was huge because
Yeah.
you couldn't run like infinite hand calculations to like optimize, right? Like you just didn't have the power. So, or the number of people to do it. So now you can take something and effectively make it a much more efficient, like, product or component, in that it's only designed, or it only uses the amount of material it needs for the loading it's going to experience, right? So that's why, like, you look at a car engine from 1970s, it's like made of cast iron, and you can probably, the design margin is probably like eight, right? Or not eight, but like three or four, right? Like it's over designed, but it's
Yeah.
also heavier than you can imagine, right? Now you're like, a much smaller engine or system is producing the same power, generating, it's able to withstand the same amount of load, but it's like one third the weight, and the design margin is like 1.2, right? Because
Right.
you have the computational power to actually be able to do that, and you can do some of that empirically, but it's time consuming. How many times would you have to iterate to do that purely empirically, design something on paper, do some hand calculation, and then prototype parts, right? As the system gets more and more complex, that just gets less and less cost effective.
I mean, I think a lot of people wouldn't mind the old school ways, as in things lasted a
That's
long time. As it's like
true.
folks can now
Yeah.
design and engineer things, so you have to, the life cycle is a lot lower. But I mean, what I'm hearing from you effectively is like even 10 years ago, systems were tools really that followed instructions. Engineers really needed to input data, analyze results, iterate manually. And now AI systems are kind of like partners. They learn, predict, optimize, and it really frees engineers to focus maybe even on like the creativity, strategy, and innovation side. And they can, like you said, like I think an AI, instead of having to manually adjust a design, an AI can make that process happen much, much faster. So it's like you guys can kind of design
Yeah.
and optimize those designs.
Because like most people, you still need to know what you want to achieve, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first part. Like if you came in and, garbage in, garbage out, if you're not able to communicate to AI like what you're trying to achieve. So like a lot of times, and I'm sure it will, but there's a lot of discussion about AI, taking jobs and things like that. But there there needs to be something fed into AI as well, right? So
Right.
I think I've listened to some people say that you won't lose your job to AI, but you'll lose your job to someone who knows how to use AI. So, you know, I think it will just free up the pace of innovation and development. So you're still going to need, engineers, but their ability to design and develop products is just going to be exponentially improved, right? The pace, uh, and maybe even the number of projects they're able to handle in parallel could likely change, right?
Yeah.
Because if you can just say, if you can just give a problem statement to some AI module, right? And then you can go away and do something else, and it comes back with, a month and a half worth of engineering work.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool thing to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's even interesting to understand what the skill set change would be then. So it's like an engineer might not need to know necessarily all the technical things we need to know now. More, they need to be able to supplement an AI's technical ability by understanding what, as you mentioned, what parameters to look out for, what design criterias to consider, and then the AI can kind of, churn that out. But I mean,
Yeah.
so it seems like there's a lot of cool innovation happening in manufacturing, especially on the hardware side. Where do you see gaps? Like, so if you could design an ultimate tool for manufacturing teams or like, engineering teams in charge of those, like what problem would it solve or what inefficiencies are you seeing or experiencing now?
Well, this is probably a really boring answer, but it goes back to uh, a lot of it is not related to the technical aspects, right, of the job. So now, granted, notwithstanding, we talked about there could be potentially huge benefits to, you know, working on really complex problems and leveraging AI. Um, but even in a more basic sense, so like take a typical product development team. They have, they have the technical work that needs to get done, but then there is an entire mechanism around compiling and reporting information, right? So, um, like to either report status of projects or to compile data or to initiate some sort of escalation chain. It's all just tedious, right? So, one thing where if you just look at like Chat GPT, right? Can you take like, hey, I've got a bunch of this raw data, and I want to plot these different variables, right? As opposed to just sitting there in Excel. It's clerical work, right? Um, if you can just feed the file to AI and be like, hey, take this Excel file, generate, I want plots of this versus this versus this versus this, and, write it into a report summary. and then you just have to basically check it. Think about how much time is spent on just, that's not plotting the plots in Excel is not value added work for an engineer. It's clerical, right? Interpreting the data is, and determining what the next steps are. So little things like that, even to the point of just project reporting, you know, uh, it's the clerical elements of the job that are necessary, but they're not value add per se, right? They're a necessary
Yeah.
evil, but they can become completely time consuming. I mean, an example that everyone intuitively understands is meetings, right? Meetings are necessary to an extent, but we've all gotten to the point where they have a purpose, right? But then they can become so big that the cost associated with the meetings outweighs the value that they provide, right? So
Yeah.
there's duplicate reporting. They become more time consuming than the actual job itself, right? They pull people from their core responsibilities. So, you could say the same thing about like those aspects of product development, right? Of the clerical elements that exist. And some of those, what's an example of stuff that computers have already solved, right? I mean, oh, perfect. Like typing, word processing, right? How many typists had to be part of a company to, um, or even like CAD, 3D modeling software, right? Uh, that undoubtedly resulted in the loss of a lot of drafting jobs, right? Um, but it completely accelerated the pace of, you know, call it like the value add engineering work. So, um, yeah, I think in short, to summarize, a lot of the clerical elements of the job, just AI seems ripe for disruption.
That makes sense. I mean, and a lot of the tech founders are kind of known for saying this. I think it was Elon Musk or I think Bezos. It's like if you didn't participate, if you were in a meeting and you didn't have something meaningful to say, he's like, you shouldn't be in the meeting. It's like, go actually be doing something productive as opposed to wasting your time just listening to other people talk. So I think a lot of people feel that frustration. But all right, let's kind of, I guess, dive into this a little bit. So when you're talking about the clerical aspects of AI, are you talking about like can you walk me through like a very rudimentary or basic workflow for this to understand, okay, how would the AI agent interact? And then like effectively what systems would they need to be connected with to allow this to like, really maximize efficiencies so that folks can really get to the value added work that you're alluding to?
I mean, one of the things that's most commonly used is like Microsoft Office products, right? So think about how many times an uh, Excel spreadsheet is pulled together to compile information, how often a PowerPoint is, or a Word document, right? So, and I think that um, Copilot maybe already can do a bunch of this stuff, but I mean, it's a simple, I'm sure that Microsoft's probably already has this or working on it, so it's probably nothing new. But um, you know, uh, you think of, I almost think about it as like a personal secretary, right? Can you offload, uh, non-value add tasks to just get done, right? You feed it some basic information about what you want accomplished, and then it does it, right? And then you're off to the next thing. So
That
that's
makes
one, right?
sense. Okay.
That's
Okay.
that's
Yeah,
like
go
that's
on.
like basic, right? So that's if you're talking about, just eliminating clerical work or reducing the time spent on clerical work is one.
So like when you're talking about this, I mean like for me like it would be nice to have concrete examples. And what I mean by that is let's take let's like like let's take Notion for example. Like a lot of companies use Notion as a project management tool so folks know what to do and you can assign stuff to folks. Like all right, Tom's going to work on this, Sarah's going to work on this. And then from that, you guys can meet and to make sure that you guys are on time or on task, on track to, for whatever KPIs or metrics. But I could see an AI agent then coming in here where it's like it can connect to both systems, automatically pull the information from the work, ask questions back and forth in real time, so that the need for you, Rob, or the need for Tom and Sarah to actually meet for a phone call or like in person goes away, because the AI is actually understanding exactly what's going on and feeding that information to both parties in real time. So, okay, that helps. So like in your example, can you kind of walk me through certain tools that are currently used and how that AI agent would fit in to then, I guess, reduce the clerical work or just increase efficiencies?
Okay, so a concrete example that I was thinking of is just compiling test data for analysis, right? So, you know, we collect, data in the lab and it comes out as like an Excel CSV. Sure, you could like write a macro, but, you know, let's say it's different data every time, right? So you would in effect need a new macro every time, right? Like I get it if it's the
Yeah.
same data collected over and over, but if you can just say, all right, I got this data, I knew I was measuring these variables, and you could say, hey, AI, module, I need you to plot this, and this, and write me, analyze the trends like that are whatever. It could help with some data analysis and generate a report of findings. And then, like, if you think about, a lab test request is submitted, technician sets up the test, runs the data, receives the data. There's an entire apparatus behind, there's think about the amount of time that's spent of either a lab engineer or in some cases like the development engineer themselves just just plotting out stuff in Excel and maybe writing a report. If you could turn that, which is sometimes could be what, 8, 12, 16 hours of work, maybe not that much, but it could be, and into like 5 minutes of you directing an AI prompt, and then you can go off and do something else, and then it sends it back to you, and then all you have to do is just check it for accuracy. I mean, that would save a lot of time, right? You think about like your typical individual contributor engineer would be interacting a lot with test data and things like that. So, I think sometimes just compiling, a lot of time is the actual compiling of the data and not so much the analysis of the data. So the analysis is
Actually,
really
yeah,
what you want the engineer to do, right?
that makes sense. I mean, an interesting idea that, like, based on what you're saying is, I mean, effectively, it seems like you kind of automate that entire process. So it's like, let's say, and you tell me if this makes sense or not. So like, let's say you as the engineer have worked and you've come up with a specific design for a product, right? Or a sub part for like in an assembly. If you're able to have the AI agent then take that, let's say it's even connected to, like, let's take the test engineer out for a second, and let's say it's connected to a 3D printer, and it doesn't actually even print the part that you're talking about. It just prints something of the material that you're talking about. And then it takes that material, and then, it stress tests that material in a variety of different, uh, I guess, places, points, so that it can understand how the material behaves in certain loads. It could then even just take that small microcosm, like, and then simulate the rest, right? Effectively, if it tests a specific product and a specific material and it understands exactly how it's handling certain loads, it can then take that and actually just simulate the environment that you would potentially put that product in. And so, like, from start to finish, something that could take weeks, months, could honestly take hours, once the design's created. Or does that not make sense?
Do you mean when you say simulate it, do you mean write the test case or actually run the test?
Well, so I
But
would
you
say
could if
a
it's a
combination. So it's like let's say you take steel, right? Let's say you have a steel part, and then you have a 3D printer that prints the steel part in like a very, very small, in the same shape roughly as the design that you had. And then that you have like a you have a I mean you have a machine that literally just pulls and pushes and prods that small part in a variety of different ways, and then the computer is analyzing the reactions. Once that's done, you could then scale that, but through simulation, right? So if I created a car that's this big, and then like the computer like compresses it, stretches it, like figures out how it deals with load. Once it understands how that material is reacting in this small conditions, it can then simulate the rest, so that you can start to iterate on it till it's like, okay, we think this is an optimized product, and then you can actually develop and create that product as a test case. But the argument would be it's probably refined to a significantly larger degree, or does that not make sense, really?
I mean, I think that's in effect what is so when I was that's in effect what's currently being done with simulation. So the models like predictive models, FEA models, simulation models, right? They're continually like refined and correlated with real world data.
Okay.
So I think what you're describing is kind of the reason why a lot of the development has started to become accelerated because the models are just higher fidelity. So you
Makes
can,
sense.
in theory, uh, you know, iterate a lot more. So you can iterate on the design and with a higher degree of confidence purely virtually before having to go to prototype. So I think some of that already exists. Um, Now, can AI be leveraged, in how those models are managed and maybe how they're continually upgraded and improved with real world data? Probably, I'm sure, right? I'm sure it's a manual process to update the model. Like, so here's an example. Let's say you have a car and you're testing it on a track and you have all this telemetry set up, right? And you also have a computer model that is predicting, various performance outputs. So basically, it's simulating different loading, right? So it's simulating the car going around the track, right? So you have the um, could you, but as you so you have what the model predicts and what the real world data predicts, right? And obviously you want those to match, but they don't always. So a lot of times you have a model, you predict, then you develop a prototype, physical prototype, you measure, and you find out that the model and the um, physical testing doesn't match up, right? So what they do is, I guess they take the physical measurements and use them to tune and correlate the model accordingly so that in subsequent iterations it becomes more and more predictable. I'm assuming that's a very manual process. So if AI could facilitate the transfer of the real world data to the model to continue growing and
That makes
updating the
sense.
model, I don't do a lot of that in my, you know, sphere, but um, yeah, any process. So in engineering, right, there's so many things that, where you're actually having to physically take new information and update, models, whatever, what have you. And it's mostly manual, right? So, and my understanding, very time consuming. So, it just seems logical that there's all types of areas where you could just feed the data to, whatever, and then that AI takes it and, actually updates the model on your behalf, right? And you probably
That
have to
makes
give it some.
sense.
So, and I don't know if that's necessarily AI or if that's just like you know, is that more just like computer programming and that you write a script to do that? I don't know.
Well, no, I
Or
think you're
maybe what
right. So I
is
think
this?
a lot of these LLMs, like the large language models, are now at a point where you don't really need to write a script. You can just give it the data and it can analyze and give you an output. So I think effectively like the low hanging fruit here is you're saying just like the grunt work of collecting the data, quickly analyzing it, creating the basic template graphics or results that you would need will be quite helpful and speed up the engineering process. And then you can kind of, but I mean, it seems like a good idea. If like, is that a somewhat manual process per your understanding across multiple industries?
Uh, I mean, everywhere I've been, certainly,
Yeah.
right? Um, I've spent, I, I mean, there's so many times when I've seen, okay, hey, I've got new data from the lab, and well, we need a couple of weeks or whatever. Maybe it's not a couple of weeks. We need a couple of days to compile all of the results, right? Um, I mean, that's time lost, right? You're just doing
Yeah.
clerical work compiling it. So if you could get the data compiled in like a couple hours, and you can actually that's time that's directly saved in the development process, right? Because now, okay, I'm no longer compiling the data. I jump straight to analyzing the data, and then from there I can, whatever, I can change geometry, I can make a design change, whatever. So yeah, I mean, the clerical work is just, it's there, it has to get done. But I mean, automating that is, you know, instant gain.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would assume like this is already being done, but it's like it seems like feedback from a lot of folks is the Microsofts of the world, they're focused on like creating these AI agents, which is requires a ridiculous amount of compute power and a ton of money. So it's like that's going to take some time. So like some of these things that you're talking about that seem easy seems like ripe for opening like a startup that could help tackle these issues because they'd be relevant across multiple industries, like tons of verticals. So if you were going to give, I guess, one last piece of advice to a startup founder maybe that wanted to do something along this, is there any like one thing that they should take into consideration or something that you would, from your experience, suggest to try to make this a successful product?
How challenging, I mean, so maybe I'll give you a problem statement, and then, um, that could be kind of the jump off point for any burgeoning entrepreneurs, right? But like, so we talked about clerical work, right? But the clerical work is like the data that's being received and it's being reported out in all these different systems, right? So you might be taking data in LabVIEW, for example, and that's exporting to Excel, and then you are analyzing the data in Excel, but then you're reporting it out in PowerPoint, right? Or even one step further, one step back at the beginning of all this, you have maybe a verification plan or a test plan written out in Excel, and then you have to input like a request into like a proprietary or in-house lab request system well, maybe it's like Microsoft Access or who knows, SharePoint, right? But it's housed somewhere for there to be a queue of testing that, someone needs to manage because there's limited resources in the lab, there's different priorities. All of that exchange of information is like manual, right? So if there were none of those, none of that information processing is value add from an engineering perspective. So the data importing into Excel, plotting the data is not value add, right? The analysis is, but the plotting is not. Generating the PowerPoint presentation is not really value add, right? Like, the communicating the conclusions is the value add, but like the actual clerical work And then, so all this different stuff, or manually inputting the test request is not right. So if there could be some way where AI can come in and, you almost have basically like a personal assistant, but it would have to interface with these various systems, right? So it could go in and say, all right, hey, I need you to pull, look at my uh, test document or verification plan, and I want you to submit requests for rows 1 through 7. I mean, something as
Yeah.
stupid as that, but I've had people tell me, they've got 35 test requests they have to put in the system. So, and those tests need to get run. So, an engineer is spending what, like 8 hours on a Friday just, submitting 35 requests. It, you know,
Yeah.
the, the submitting of the request is not, it's just clerical, right? So there's just, in my view, in that context, if you could eliminate the clerical stuff. Oh, and then sorry, last piece. So this is totally kind of left field, but um, bill of material management, um, and in general product lifecycle management. Um, there is so much manual process involved in uploading, like releasing drawings, releasing bills of materials, um, you know, from a purely from a time consuming, from a, what's the word? From a, how much time is dedicated to that? It's a lot. And
Sure.
again, it's like a necessary evil, but it's very time consuming. You could have an engineer tied up for like 2, 3 days just releasing bills of materials into the system, right? So, yeah, I haven't thought about that too in depth, but the less time spent on that, if there could be, better AI assisted, uh, some sort of user interface where you can just state, uh, you know, uh, think about how like graphical user interfaces have improved,
Yeah.
like interacting with a computer, right? Can you develop the same sort of thing to eliminate a lot of the tedious processes associated with those types of things, right? Just
That
kind
makes
of,
sense. Are also like from your experience and like your friends that are in the same industry, are a lot of these systems that would need to be plugged into legacy systems, third-party systems, or internal systems that were developed? Because I think you're right. I think there's a lot of actually opportunity for AI to take care of effectively most of the stuff that you mentioned relatively easily. But I think the idea would then be, okay, it would be more understanding what systems they need to interact with and mesh with so that they can, to allow for that two-way communication.
I would say they're mostly third party and mostly legacy.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, Google any, product lifecycle management software. There's a whole handful of them. But yeah, those would likely be the ones that, currently it just feels very, very clerical and very manual, right? So you have to physically need to know how to operate the software. You have to know the workflows, and it's just, I mean, I find it boring. I don't know if you're like me, I'm assuming, and I think a lot of engineers are the same way, that just tedious task processing is not really right up their alley. They don't really find that motivating, right? I think they want to think creatively and solve problems, and those types of tedious elements of the job are just, a distraction that
Yeah,
get in the way of the bigger goal.
that makes sense. All right, well, let's do a quick shift of focus into real estate real quick. Chat about that a little bit, and then we can draw the parallels. So, you mentioned you got into real estate or you were interested in it early on. Obviously, seeing parents or folks that drive Benzes is an easy reason to get attracted to a particular, a particular investment tool or vehicle. Um, but now that you've done it for a while, let's start with what's probably been the biggest challenge you faced as a real estate investor.
Um, uh, I wouldn't say it's a challenge necessarily, but the most time-consuming aspect is finding and acquiring the deal, the property at first.
Hold on one second. But yeah, I'm on podcast.
You can edit this piece out.
Give me one
Tell
second.
them what's up.
I need to put the time that I need to remove one.
You like my U of I mug?
I do like your vibe mug.
I want people to know that I'm smart.
But we'll assume U of I is dumb if you showcase that.
Nah, bro. We were top five when you and I were there. I don't know what happened to those idiots now, but they fell off.
Sorry, one second. I want to two.
Let me just check and see what's going on here.
Plus, all right. What time is it? Okay,
Tell me
107.
when you're ready to continue.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump back in it. All right.
All right. What was the question again? You were
Yeah.
asking about.
So, what drew you?
Oh,
So, obviously,
challenge.
yeah. What's one of the biggest challenges that you faced?
So on a different podcast that I listen to sometimes, they talk about like, you know, uh, what are some patterns in real estate investing and in terms of time commitment. And the biggest time commitment is usually when you're trying to acquire a new property, right? So obviously you have to, kind of set up, talk with your agent, figure out what you want, right? What price range, what type of asset, is it single family, multifamily, condo, blah blah blah. Um, and then it's time consuming, uh, you know, viewing properties that so a once when you know what you want, it tends to go a little bit more smoothly, but um, it's still time consuming, just the acquisition phase in general, right? You got to flag ones that you like, you got to go see them. It's a lot of just spending time out in the field. Um, now, I don't recommend anyone skip that piece. I think it's really important that you like actually get in and see what you're dealing with because pictures can be very deceiving. Neighborhoods can be really deceiving. You could see something, oh, this looks, I've seen many where it's like, oh, this looks really promising. You get there and you're like, this is nothing. It's not at all what I had in mind. Um, so yeah, you can't really skip that step, or I wouldn't recommend that you skip that step. But in general, uh, you know, you're pulling information from the MLS, and then I have my own type of calculator, right, where I'm feeding information around the purchase price, anticipated rent rate, would you have to rehab or not? And then, the calculations are pretty basic, but that spits out your estimated, ROI and things like that, cash on cash return. Um, so there would be a really big opportunity to be able to link like MLS info directly into a model for calculating ROI. So,
Okay.
you could, instead of looking at a bunch of properties that have um, a set price, it would be really interesting. This is something kind of I've thought about is, well, what if you developed something where, like on Redfin, instead of looking at price, you can say, based off of these assumptions, assuming market rent rate, give me and assuming certain, uh, certain uh, uh, costs associated with maintenance and vacancy, what are the ROI? So view these opportunities in the context of ROI, right? As opposed to, but you would need to be able to pull the pricing and all that kind of stuff. So
Is
that would,
is that information readily available for like I should say my argument or my question would be, forget the layman or the individual. Let's say you're actually in the real estate, you have your license, you have access to maybe databases that aren't publicly available. The information that you're saying that you would need to pull for these calculations, is that then
it's on the
available?
MLS, yeah, right.
Sufficient?
So I mean, you need the price, and so it's not like it is, from what I can tell, very manual, right? So your agent, they'll set up search parameters in the MLS. So it's like, I only want 3 bed, 2 bath. I want, between 300 and $350,000 price range. And this is my search area. And then it'll automatically send you properties that fall within those search parameters, right? Um, but then, and then you can also search, hey, what are all of the like properties in this area, with these same parameters, right? Let's say they're 3 bed, 2 bath between 1,200 and 1,700 square feet. Um, Pull up all units available for rent and have rented in the last so many days, right? So many months. Um, so that's the information you're presented with, and then you have to take that, and everyone uses their own calculator to determine what deal is a good deal and what's not a good deal. So there's also a lot of variability there, right? One 3 bed, 2 bath, depending on the condition of the inside, is going to rent for a lot different than a brand new, an old 3 bed, 2 bath versus a new construction 3 bed, 2 bath. So, you have to, what's time consuming is you have to look at it property by property and, make an assessment on the condition and then say, okay, this one looks better than most in the area. So can I, like, realistically, what do I think? This would be maybe be on the higher end of the rent spectrum, right? Or another one like, okay, yeah, it is the same specs, but the condition looks worse. I'd expect it to be at the lower end of the range, right? But you have to like manually look through photos and all that kind of stuff. If there was some sort of AI tool that, could predict the rent based on like analyzing the pictures, right? Does this look newer? When was like, I'm sure there's probably a set number of variables that impact what that you could have a predictive AI tell you what the rent might be based on when it was built, when it was last renovated, what specific area it's in, uh, how does the condition appear relative to the other ones, right? That's all manual. You have to do it manually, right? And that helps you narrow down you know your window, but and then you got to go see them. So once you get like a tenant in there, and maybe after some initial hiccups, right, you fix a couple things that are bothering them, then like the workload really drops off, and then it's just the management, right? Like, if you've got it to a good state of uh, livability, call it, and you've fixed kind of the major repairs, then it's most part cruise control, right? You're checking in. And then on the management side, I'm sure there's a lot of opportunity for AI. Like, could you, how could you replace the property management nuts and bolts with like an AI assistant? So I have a leaky toilet. Okay, so instead of the tenant calling you and then you calling 5 different plumbers, can you would there be a way to like set up an automated system that, uh, like, hey, there's an app, submit it on the app processes your request, messages, one of set number of vendors you have, and schedules a repair, right? And coordinates a time that works that, so that's the other piece of like what consumes your time as an investor. How does it become more difficult to scale is property management, right? So most people hire out property management firm, but it takes what, 10, 15%. Could you develop like a proprietary app that, hey, have your tenants download this app? The app is kind of the go-between where they submit all of their, maintenance requests, and maybe you just check in on the app. It gives you some dashboard of, you know, what's currently in process, maybe above a certain value you need to approve, right? The repair. So yeah, there's a lot of manual processes with managing real estate. That's probably what makes it a good thing to get into because it scares a lot of people off, deters
Yeah.
them. And, you know, uh, yeah, I think one, two properties, it doesn't really make a difference, right? But as you probably start getting to like four, five, six, et cetera, right? Now, if you really want to scale, management is a piece of it, right? So
Yep.
again, most people don't. Why hasn't it hit big? Because big time investors, they're just going to have property management anyways and built it into their cost. Um, but for small mom and pop that don't want to take the hit of 10, 15%, if you can say, well, hey, now I got a portfolio of seven, eight properties. I'm not big time, but I'm also not small. Seven or eight can eat up a lot of your time if you've got a day job. Can an app, with some AI enabled functionality, take a lot of the burden of this, property management off your shoulders?
Yeah, makes sense. AI agent for property management. I think that seems like a reasonable solution to help mitigate a lot of the, I guess, headache and the time consuming parts of the, I guess, the real estate process. I mean, I guess one thing I had a question to ask, it's like even with respect to like that ROI calculator that you were talking about, um, I mean, it would make sense to have an AI agent, and even if it couldn't tell you the exact, it could tell you, based on, you know, comparables, what a low, medium, and high rent would be, and then you could obviously make that judgment call based on where you think your property fits. But is I would say, is the information, some of the information you were mentioning in the MLS, like last renovation and all that stuff, is that all that stuff typically tracked?
That's the other problem. It's like, I think there's a lot of inconsistency in that. They may claim it was renovated, they may not. I think it's just case by case dependent. I don't know enough about the MLS to really comment like what is absolutely required versus what is not. Um, I think like if you look at Redfin, um, I think a lot of the info is pulled directly from the MLS. So, in some cases, they'll note because it's a selling feature, hey, renovated in, whatever, 2023. And in other cases, it may have been, and the agent just doesn't list it, right? So I
Yeah.
think the inputs are not always the same property to property. Um, but I'm assuming there's some stuff that you must have, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to list number of bedrooms and dimensions and things like that. Um, so I don't know if that answers your question. I think what you were saying about the rent, if it's purely looking at data that's of existing like rented and listed for rent properties, you don't necessarily need AI for that, right? You can just look at a distribution and, the computer can tell you, give me, assume 25th percentile rent or assume 75th percentile rent and then spit out, the numbers, right? It's just math problem.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you pull data from these different sources to actually do that, right? And is that
Yeah.
data available,
Yeah, so I,
right?
I I would say, yeah, so effectively the AI agent would, the variability in the data I think makes it prime for an AI agent being like, okay, this is the information you need to pull, and like let's say there's 100 data points you want, like there's going to be times where you might have 10 data points, 70 data points, 80 data points, and then the AI agent's going to make the best call based on the data that's available. So to your point, it's like it's automating that whole process, but and it's
Well,
obviously going to tell you the inputs, but it will then, but again, it simplifies the process. So instead of you having to scrape the data from multiple sources, the idea would be the AI agent would be doing that for you on a continual basis.
right, or where data is not available, like a photo, like you can't pull. So, for example, what's the condition of the unit? There's no
Sure.
data on the condition. So,
Right.
if AI can compare photos unit to unit, and then based on, so let's assume you had AI look at 25 rental properties, and it looks at the 25 photos, and it creates a relative ranking of condition based on its
Fair.
assessment of the photos. Then you could say, all right, hey, like, you know, that's a way you could stack or rank prospective rental properties, right, on condition by using some like photo comparison that I don't know. That's just a
No,
thought.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think it makes a lot of sense. I guess the only tricky part here would be, are they using recent photos or are they using stock photos, right? But but
Yeah,
but to your point, yeah, regardless, I think at the very least it'll probably give you an idea of, you know, properties that you're more inclined to look at versus not, and then you can make that judgment call yourself.
yeah, that's true.
But yeah, okay, so so again here it does seem like, and there seems to be a common theme, like anywhere where you have legacy systems or legacy products that have a lot of manual intervention, it seems like AI can really simplify that, and there's an opportunity here for, from the consumer end or even from a B2B end, to really help streamline that process so the folks that people are hiring can work on, as you said, the value added work as opposed to the grunt work that kind of just is time consuming. So, with having said that and kind of diving into real estate and product development, you know, I would say you've worked in two very different fields, let's say, real estate and product development. But I feel like there's a lot of lessons that connect the two. So, like, what's one insight from, manufacturing that's you would say you think has helped you succeed in real estate?
Um, I would say the importance of processes is one. So, in product development, it's critical. We at the beginning of this convo, we talked about clarity, right? So, providing teams with clarity. Often, how do you establish clarity? Is you have a process that's, it's repeatable over time, right? So instead of reinventing the wheel with every project, you have a defined product development process with different, gates and stages and things like that. And, you know, that saves a lot of time, you know, purely in virtue of the fact that you have the steps clearly identified, right? It's the framework, it's the blueprint. Um, Same goes for real estate, right? If you take that type of process definition into deal acquisition and deal property management, you again you're not reinventing the wheel, right? So, I mean, the process I use anytime I want to acquire like a new piece of real estate is the same. So, I have, the model I use to assess a given property, and it's a lot of rinse and repeat, right? So, um, I figured when I first started getting into it, instead of, you know, scrambling back of the napkin calculations down at each place, I would say, all right, before I even go check a property, I'm going to run it through my calculator. And even better yet, I gave it to my agent. So my real estate agent, before he would send something to me, he would send me a listing and he would send me the numbers because he's like, hey, I just inputted what I think the rents would be for this place, and what the purchase price is, and et cetera, et cetera. And he would, show the dashboard of, hey, here's what I think our cash on cash return is. Here's what the ROI would be. And here's the place. Do you want to go check it out? So he even got into the same mindset, right? Like he wasn't even showing me stuff that wasn't passing my parameters. And I would give him kind of general rules of thumb, like, hey, I want to get, over 6% cash on cash return, right? Something like that. And then he just wouldn't send me anything that kind of didn't fall within those ranges. So it's nice because as you go through the reps, you just eliminate a lot of the ambiguity, right? Now, of course, you can put the wrong numbers in, right? So you kind of have to be conservative. Um, but yeah, once you get it down, it's just going through the repetitions, and it becomes easier and easier with every go around. So that's one thing. I think process is huge. What what I learned, maybe something also that translates to both, um, and back to the soft skill side, it's relationships, right? So, similarly in product development, um, internal to your organization, you want to have, good relationships developed with key stakeholders from different functions, right? But also with vendors, uh, you know, engineering partners, etc. And then similarly in real estate, it's critical that you have relationships developed with your whole team. So not just an agent, but a lender, contractors, right? Painters, plumbers. So again, it's once you establish that initial groundwork, it just becomes so much easier. You're not scrambling around, right? I know who my agent is. I know who my lender is. Um, the second deal that I bought, um, just to kind of highlight the importance of relationships, is um, it was last minute. Um, there was a condo that was listed for like 300 grand for a while, and I'm like, it's kind of pricey, but I said it looks good, but I think it's a little overpriced. And lo and behold, it dropped to like 285, and I saw it on Redfin. I'm like, oh, price change on a place you favorited. And same day, my agent sends it to me. He's like, hey, they just dropped the price on this place. He's like, I think it might be a good deal. We had never talked about it, right?
Makes sense.
Um, but of course, he's looking at the numbers the same way I am. So he's like, you want to go over there today? And I'm like, sure. I was working from home that day. I happened to be with my parents in Plainfield. So we're like, let's go take a drive up there, go there, see it. He's like, hey, there's already an offer on this place. He said, but if you think it's a good deal, like I'd recommend we put one in today. And I wasn't really planning to go, buy anything, so I hadn't even gotten the pre-approval or anything like that. I was just casually looking, and I'm like, yeah, I'll put an offer, but I don't have the pre-approval. And my agent's like, hey, look, don't worry about it. He's like, I'll call, and I've been using the same lender who he put me in touch with, so we all have a relationship. So he's like, hey, I'll call the guy from Guaranteed Rate. He's like, I'll tell him that we want to put an offer on a place today. Can he knock out a quick pre-approval letter? He already has all my information, my income, my assets, liabilities, etc. So all it was is a quick phone call. He's like, hey, is this info the same? This. He's like, yep, you're good. He like knocked out a pre-approval letter, and we shot it over with the offer in like a couple hours. If I didn't have the relationship set right, I would have missed out on putting it in. That was the last day they were asking for offers, and same thing. We both came in at asking price, and the agent was like, "Well, you have better credit, so we'll give you the deal." So things
Nice.
like that, there is a mindset that yeah, you should shop around rates and things like that. That is true to an extent, but better is having a relationship with a lender that knows your financial situation and they become a partner as opposed to, you're not rate shopping every time. You just go, you know, is it better to get, you know, 2 basis points off on a interest rate, which I did go rate shopping. My guy was just as good, but or is it better that you're able to land a deal last minute, right? Because you have the relationship already set up. So I think that kind of speaks to it's important to kind of build your team and you know
No, it's
have
good.
a
Key takeaway: relationships help you put it in quick and come up with a with a good outcome. So I'm glad to hear that.
uh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
Is that going to
no,
be
that
edited?
I will leave it in. Um, all right. So so this was good, man. So to kind of close things out, let's do. Conversation's been great. Love the insights. Let's before we wrap it up, let's do a quick lightning round, if you're down with
All
that.
right.
I'm just
Yeah,
gonna
let's
ask
do
you a
it.
quick question. So, what's one book or resource you'd recommend to founders or investors?
Book or resource? Book or resource? Um, Specifically to founders. So I read a book. I'm not through it. God, what's it called? Uh, it's on my nightstand. Oh, it's like Bill.
Isn't there a
It's by.
podcast that you listen to a ton about for real estate that you always
Oh, yeah, yeah,
rave to
yeah.
me
Okay,
about?
okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah. So that's an easy one. Sorry. Yeah, you said books. Podcast. I really like Coach Carson. So he's a real estate podcast. Um, so a lot of these real estate podcasts are all about, um, all right, you got to buy one, and then you got to buy two, and then you got to buy, a fourplex, then you got to buy a 50-unit building, right? And it's basically about building a giant real estate investment empire, which is not a bad thing if that's your thing, right? Those are valuable. Um, his argument, his whole thing is the small and mighty real estate investor. So, it's like if you can get to 4 rental properties, as an example, um, you're going to change your financial life permanently, right? And if assuming you manage them effectively, right? Um, you're going to be in a totally different place than if you had none, and it's going to, from a financial security and all that. So, what his argument was that you don't need a giant portfolio to kind of alter your financial future. Yeah, I think he's good. He talks about uh, a lot of themes around when to build versus, when to build and when to scale versus when to start paying down debt and things like that. So, operating on the assumption that you don't always want to, it's not for everyone to constantly build and build and build. And then your portfolio consumes you as opposed to kind of it enabling, you know, uh, you to have more free time, which is why kind of probably a lot of people invest. So yeah, I think that's a great one. What else? I like the Prof G podcast with Scott Galloway. I don't know if you ever listen to that. He talks a lot about kind of like disruptive technologies and things like that. I think he's a business professor at NYU. Bald guy. It's a good one. And then a book. God, the book is going to bother me, but
No,
it's
no,
by the.
you don't have to. It was just one book or resource. So it's just you don't have
Okay,
to
so
give
I
all
didn't
those.
really
Either
do
one's fine.
lightning round. This is to
It's
going
all
too
right.
slow. All right,
No, don't worry about it, man. So I got three more questions for you for the
all
lightning
right.
round, and
Lightning
then
round.
we'll close it out. So if you could automate one thing in your life right now, what would it be?
Um, Man, in my life. Come back to that. Let me think
All right.
about it.
What's one car you'd keep forever, no matter what?
A Porsche,
Any specific Porsche or just any Porsche?
some type of 911.
Makes sense. And what's the best piece of advice you've ever received or one that sticks out in your mind?
I would say be grateful. It's easy to be, uh, you know, it's easy to view things in a negative light and then overlook, how many blessings that you have. So I think that's the best one. That's from my mom, so I'll
It's a
give her a
good one.
shout out for that.
Yeah, for sure. And then we'll go back to the automate thing. It can be personal or professional, but like what's one thing you could automate right now to make your life easier?
Struggling to come up with a concrete one, but I mean, I hate menial tasks. Like I hate, sorry, tedious tasks. So give you an example. I order something online. My now fiance will kill me for saying, and it annoys her to no end, but I'll just I won't return it. If even if it doesn't fit, then I'll get too lazy to return it. I hate going through and sitting in a line, waiting at the post office or somewhere else, or printing out a label. It's annoying to me. I hate having to do like repetitive, non-productive tasks. So that's a
Sure.
general. I'm sure there's a million ones, but I want to automate those. Not driving. I like driving, so I don't like self-driving cars.
For
So
sure.
you can have them.
I guess
We've
last one, looking back at your career and investments, what's one lesson you'd want everyone listening to take away?
Oh, this is easy. Learn from, always have a learning mindset. Uh, there's always going to be people around you that you can learn from. Try to learn as much as possible. I've been lucky enough in my career to have some great mentors early on, and then even now. So, just go in with a sense of humility and trying to learn from their experiences and from their kind of knowledge base. And yeah, you'll be before you know it, you'll be in a position where you're able to kind of impart that on others.
No, that's great advice. So, Rob, thanks for dropping some serious knowledge today. For everyone listening, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, share this episode with your friends, and leave us a review. Rob, anything you'd like to plug? If not, we'll drop your socials and anything else you'd like in the description so people can follow your journey.
Yeah, I mean, nothing to plug. It's been a pleasure to be here, and yeah, hopefully we get some likes. I had a good
Yeah,
time. A lot of
appreciate
fun.
your time, man. It was fun, as
All
always.
right, take care, man.
All right, buddy. Take
All
care.
right, bye.